The lease on my lift was 3 months behind, and I was starting to think the bank would call before I did. I'd been running Kowalski Auto out of a rented bay on the edge of Barrie since I was 26. Nothing fancy. A 2-post lift that I bought secondhand from a shop in Orillia that was closing down, a toolbox I'd been adding to piece by piece since trade school, and a small loan from TD that I kept telling myself I'd pay off by spring. It was October now, a different spring than the one I'd been thinking of. I didn't grow up planning to be a mechanic. I just turned out to be good at it, and good at it turned out to matter more than anything I'd planned. My dad worked for Ontario Hydro for 30 years. He wanted me to go into the trades properly. Electrician, plumber, something with a union behind it. Instead, I ended up under other people's cars, which he said was close enough. That Tuesday morning, I had 3 jobs on the books. A brake job on a Subaru that belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Poulin, a coolant flush on a pickup that a guy named Derek had been putting off since July, and an oil change I'd been squeezing in between everything else for a regular customer of mine. I finished the first 2x2 in the afternoon. The oil change customer called to reschedule, and that was it. Quiet shop, gray sky outside the roll-up door, and me sitting on an overturned milk crate, eating a sandwich I'd made at 6 in the morning and no longer wanted. By 4, I decided to call it. Locked the bay, loaded my toolbox into the back of my truck under the topper. I always brought it with me, habit more than anything, and got on the road home. I live north of town, just past the turn for the ski hills, on a stretch of Highway 26 that most people only drive in winter. I rented a place there because it was cheap and quiet, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions about the parts I kept in the garage. The drive back usually took about 25 minutes. That Tuesday, it took longer. About 10 kilometers out of town, I saw a car stopped on the shoulder. A gray Honda CR-V, maybe 8 or 9 years old, hazard lights going. A woman was standing outside it, facing the road, one arm raised like she wasn't sure if flagging people down was something she was allowed to do. I slowed down. I don't know exactly why, I always do. My dad used to say it's because I can't help myself around a broken thing. Maybe that's true. I pulled over about 20 meters ahead and walked back. She was in her mid-30s, I'd say. Dark coat, hair pulled back, the kind of tired look you get when something has gone wrong at the end of a long day rather than the beginning. Behind her in the passenger seat, I could see an older woman, 70-something, sitting very still with her hands in her lap. "I don't know what happened," the woman said before I even reached her. "It just stopped. I was driving and then it just stopped." Her name, she told me eventually, was Petra Halvorsen. The woman in the passenger seat was her mother, Ingrid. They were coming back from a doctor's appointment in Barrie, something about Ingrid's knee, and had been 20 minutes from home when the engine quit. "Do you have CAA?" I asked. "I do, but my phone's almost dead." I called and they said the wait is over 2 hours. I looked at the car. "You mind if I take a look?" She looked at me the way people always do when a stranger offers to help with something mechanical. Equal parts grateful and suspicious. I got it. I'd feel the same way. "I'm a mechanic," I said. "I've got tools in my truck. Worst case, I just confirm it needs a tow." She let me look. I popped the hood. The engine bay was clean, which told me she took care of it. I checked the obvious things first. Battery terminals, no corrosion, spark in the right place. I asked her to try starting it while I listened. It turned over but didn't catch. Fuel pump, I thought, or possibly the crankshaft position sensor, which on this generation of CR-V was a known issue. I had a code reader in my toolbox. I plugged it into the OBD port under the dash and got a P0335. Crankshaft position sensor, exactly what I'd suspected. "It's the crank sensor," I told Petra. "The engine can't figure out where it is in its cycle, so it won't fire. It's not a dangerous problem. You're not going to hurt anything leaving it here, but you're not driving it home tonight." She looked at her mother. Ingrid was watching us through the windshield with calm, patient eyes, like she had decided some time ago to stop worrying about things she couldn't control. "Is it expensive?" Petra asked. "The part's around $80–90. Labor's maybe an hour. It's not a bad fix, all things considered." She nodded slowly. "Can you do it?" "Not here on the side of the road with the light going. But I can come to wherever you have it towed, if you want." She looked relieved in the way people do when a situation stops being uncertain. I helped her get the hazards sorted so the battery wouldn't drain further, made sure Ingrid was comfortable, and waited with them until the CAA truck arrived 40 minutes later. The driver was a guy named Tony, who I knew vaguely from around town. He loaded the CR-V without a fuss. Before they left, Petra wrote down my number in her phone. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. "If that's okay." "That's fine," I said. I drove home in the dark, thinking about the crank sensor and not much else. She called at 8:30 the next morning. The CRV had gone to a dealership, her regular shop, and they'd quoted her $420 for the repair. She was calling to ask if I could do it for less. I told her I could do it for $150 parts and labor. She was quiet for a second. That's a big difference. Dealers have overhead, I said. I don't have as much of it. She had the car towed to my bay by noon. I did the job in just under an hour, test drove it up and down the service road behind the building, and called her to pick it up by 2. She came with Ingrid, who insisted on being helped out of the car and walking into the shop on her own, which she did with great determination, and a cane that had a moose painted on the handle. Ingrid looked around my bay with the deliberate attention of someone who has spent time in places like it. My husband had a shop, she said. Not cars, furniture, but same smell almost. Wood and oil. Where was this, I asked. Owen Sound, she said. Long time ago. I gave her a coffee from the pot I keep going all day, and she sat on a stool near the office door while I settled up with Petra. I charged $150. Petra tried to give me an extra $20 for waiting with them on the highway. I told her I couldn't take it. She looked like she wanted to argue, so I said I'd take it as a tip for the coffee and left it at that. They left around 2:30. I didn't think much more about it. The letter arrived in early November. It came from a company called Strathmore Property Holdings, and it informed me that the owner of the building I rented my bay from had sold the property and that the new owner was not renewing commercial leases under 5 years. Mine was month to month. I had 60 days. I sat with that letter for a long time. The bay was the whole business. Everything I had, the lift I still owed on, the compressor, the toolbox, the regulars who brought their cars to this specific address, all of it depended on that bay. Moving wasn't impossible, but finding another rental in Barrie at a price I could carry, while also still paying off the equipment, was a problem I didn't immediately know how to solve. I called 3 commercial real estate listings that afternoon. 2 were out of my range. One called me back 2 days later and turned out to be in a location so far from the main roads that I didn't think the drive-by business would ever find me. I started losing sleep. Not dramatically. I'm not someone who falls apart in a visible way, but I'd lie awake doing the same math over and over, coming up with the same answer, which was that I didn't have a lot of runway. My one good option, it turned out, was a unit in a property on the south end of town that was managed by a company called Ridgeway Commercial. I called about it. The base rent was manageable, but there was a clause in the lease about equipment financing that my situation ran into. The manager I spoke to said the property owner reviewed all new tenants personally and that there was a waiting list. He seemed skeptical of me without saying so directly, the way people sometimes are when you tell them you run a one-person shop and you've been doing it for 8 years. I put my name in anyway and waited. Then came the Tuesday in late November that I'd rather not think about too long. I was served with papers at my shop. The previous tenant of my bay, a guy who'd run a detailing business out of the space before me, had apparently been collecting deposits from customers for work he never did before he shut down. Some of those customers, through a process I still don't fully understand, had found my name associated with the address and filed a claim that pulled me in. My lawyer, a guy named Dennis who I'd used once before for a lease dispute, called it a nuisance suit. "You didn't do this," he said. "We'll sort it out." But sorting it out took money I didn't have a lot of, and time I didn't want to spend, and there was a court date set for the 3rd week of December. December is a slow month for a shop like mine. People push off non-emergency repairs until the new year. The lawsuit ate into what little I had going. I kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept answering the phone. One morning in early December, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this the mechanic who helped us on Highway 26 in October?" a woman asked. An older voice. "Careful." It took me a second. "Mrs. Ingrid?" I said. A small pause. "Yes, Ingrid Halverson. You fixed my daughter's car." "I remember," I said. "Is everything okay with the CRV?" "The car is fine. I'm calling about something else." She paused again. "My daughter told me about your situation with the building." I didn't know Petra knew about the building. I hadn't mentioned it to her. But Barrie isn't that big, and people talk. "I'm managing it," I said, which wasn't entirely true. "I want to tell you something," Ingrid said. "My son-in-law, Petra's husband, he manages properties, commercial. I told him about you. He said the unit on Dunlop South that you inquired about, the one with the waiting list, he manages that building." I didn't say anything. "He would like to speak with you," she said, "if you're willing." His name was Stuart Halverson. Petra had married into the name. He called me the same afternoon, direct and no nonsense, and asked me to come in. I expected an awkward situation. I expected to feel like I was receiving charity, Instead, Stuart sat across from me with a file on his desk and asked me about my business. Not in a casual way, in the way someone asks when they are actually trying to understand something. He asked how long I'd been running the shop, what my average monthly revenue looked like, how many regular customers I had, what my outstanding debt was, and on what terms. I told him everything honestly, which is the only way I know how to answer direct questions. At the end, he leaned back and said, "The clause in the lease, that was the problem. That's there to filter out operations that are overleveraged. What you have is a single equipment loan in normal standing. That's not what the clause is meant to catch." The manager I spoke to seemed to think differently, I said. Stuart nodded. "That manager reads clauses broadly. I don't." He offered me a 2-year lease on the unit at a rate I could actually carry. Not discounted. I want to be clear about that. Market rate for the size and location. But the terms were fair, and the clause wasn't going to be used as a barrier. I asked him why he was doing this. He thought about it for a moment. "My mother-in-law is a good judge of people," he said, "and you charged her daughter $150 for a repair that most shops would have charged $400 for. That's not someone who takes advantage of a situation." He picked up his pen. I also checked around. "You have a reputation for being straight with people. In my business, that matters." I signed the lease before Christmas. The lawsuit was still hanging over me when Stuart called someone else on my behalf, not to fix it, but to point me toward a legal clinic out of Georgian College that took on small business cases. The paralegal there, a second-year student named Marcus, calm, thorough, and apparently unintimidated by anything, pulled the original documents and found that the association between my business and the previous tenant's address had been made in error. The previous tenant had never formally surrendered his registered business address, and when he vacated, the records hadn't been updated. My name had been added to a claim that was never about me. The case was dropped before the court date. I drove home after I got the call and sat in my driveway for about 10 minutes doing nothing, just sitting. The kind of stillness you get when something you've been holding up finally comes down. I thought about the highway in October, the CRV with the hazards going, Ingrid sitting in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her moose-handled cane and her quality of absolute patience. Petra raising her hand to flag me down and then looking like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. I hadn't stopped because I thought something good would come of it. I stopped because there was a car on the side of the road and I'm a mechanic and I had my tools in the truck. That's all it was. But I also hadn't overcharged Petra because I knew she was in a bind. I'd charged her what the job was worth because that's what the job was worth. It wasn't generosity. It was just the only way I knew how to run things. My dad used to say that your reputation is the only thing that keeps working when you're not in the room. I always thought that was just something dads say. Turned out he was right. I moved into the new bay in February. It took a weekend to get everything transferred. The lift required a proper rigor, which cost me more than I wanted to spend, but less than I'd feared. My regulars followed me to the new address without complaint. Mrs. Poulin drove 30 extra minutes because, she said, she wasn't going to start over with a new mechanic at her age. The lift is paid off now. The bank loan is almost there. I'm not rich. I'm not even comfortable in any way that most people would recognize as comfortable. But the lights are on, the lift goes up and down, and there's work in the books for next week and the week after that. Ingrid came in for coffee once in the spring. She brought butter tarts from a bakery in Collingwood and sat on the stool near the office door while I finished up a brake job. She didn't stay long. On her way out, she patted the side of my toolbox once, just lightly, the way you'd acknowledge something that had done its job. I don't know why that stuck with me, but it did.